so much for allowing me to do an interview with you.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for that lovely dinner you've just done for me. It was
Well,
we've just had dinner at Lynne's, and her husband are excellent cooks.
well, it's so lovely to have you here in this setting because we've met all over the place at different conferences.
That's
and
it.
We come together here, which is rather special.
This is
So
wonderful.
thank you for
You've got
coming.
a lovely home, so thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Now, I've got my little Parkinson's clipboard here. So I've got a few questions, and
Okay.
we may divert. We'll
That's
see.
fine.
But
I don't mind.
But I want to start with basically, you are probably one of the best known reflexologists. You really, really are. And when I studied years ago, you were actually on the exam paper as one of the modern eminent contributors to reflexology. And basically what I want to know is, when did you start, and who taught you, and how did you get into reflexology? Because it wasn't very well known even when I started, and you were way before me. So tell me your story, please.
Right. Well, in about 1990, I was very keen to leave IBM and the technical world I worked in,
Right.
and go into more complementary work. And I was going to do a nutrition course.
Right.
But well-known nutritionist Catherine Marsden gave me a reflexology treatment. I found that really interesting. And I then had some reflexology. They were lessons at Neal's Yard just for lay people. And as soon as I touched the feet, I thought, this is what I'd like to do rather than nutrition.
You were home.
It was really odd because I was not someone who would have ever wanted to do massage, and I certainly wouldn't have taken up chiropody or anything. So it was quite a surprise to me to find that I really wanted to work on the body through the feet. So I trained with the International Institute and was lucky enough to have the last year of tuition, last year and a half, with Tony Porter, who went on to do ART.
Hence your friendship with Tony.
Tony, and of course I met Dwight Byers because he came over to London on a few of the modules and gave us extra training. And
so it wasn't Jenny that taught you, it was Tony.
It was Tony Porter. So and I was very lucky because I got one of the last places on his course, and by the time I qualified 18 months later, because I did a few extra things, he was ready to set up ART. So I just got to be taught by him in time.
Isn't it amazing when things happen and you look back and you're thinking, my goodness, it was the right time and it really all fell into place. It happened for a reason.
And Tony is a great friend of mine now as well, but he was a great mentor in the early days to me, especially with the discovery and development of VRT.
I can imagine. Absolutely. I would imagine you sort of right behind you, encouraging you to develop it.
And in fact, when I first discovered something unusual, it was to Tony I turned to and said, is this new, this weight-bearing work, or is it just new to me? Because he's travelled the world.
Of course,
and he could have said, I saw it in the Philippines or somewhere else in the world, and it's not used much here. But he said, I've never seen it before. I went on an ART course in London, and he was very interested in my work. He'd experimented with what I was doing. And so he got me to show this group of 20 people. And lots of those people got results. So Tony was very key in his gentle, kind, supportive way.
He's a wonderful man.
Yes. And in fact, he rang me and said, I'm so excited about this new development, and I'm writing about it in my ART newsletter. And he said, I'm just finishing the article tonight, and it's going to be printed. And he said, what do you call it? And this was way back in 1996.
I'm so glad you have just said this, because we've used two initials and we haven't actually said what they're for yet.
No.
ART, we'll do that one first. That's Advanced Reflexology Techniques, which is Tony Porter's techniques. and I am hopefully going to be doing an interview with Tony Porter at some stage in the future. VRT is what you said, and that's your techniques, vertical reflexology techniques.
Yes, and what it's also called, and what I told Tony when he asked me, though I thought of it in the 1 second he asked me, because he said, I'm writing, what do you call it? And I said, well, I call it vertical reflex therapy. So
not techniques then, therapy.
It's totally interchangeable now. Right. So when it was copyrighted and trademarked in the early days, which I didn't think of doing myself, but my women's group more or less told me I ought to, because they felt
that's very sensible
they felt
advice.
I was on to something a bit different.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot of study and my own little research and development, and because I was getting such rather astoundingly good results with a few people, they said you ought to make the name your own.
Yes.
And I think, although I didn't give it a thought when I told Tony vertical reflex therapy, it actually was slightly more unusual than vertical reflexology, which is the title of the books I've written.
Yes.
So they're interchangeable, and they're quite good, because whether you say vertical reflex therapy or vertical reflexology techniques, it's still VRT.
It is.
And it's a nice roll off the tongue.
And it's yours.
Well, yes, that's right. It's sort of mine.
Now, what I want to ask, because VRT is so different to how everybody else gets taught reflexology. We're all taught you're working on the sole of the foot to start with, and you may sort of start with the diaphragm, and or you may start with the toes, but it's with the sole of the foot to start with, and then you progress to the dorsum of the foot to work the intercostals and the breasts and the lymphatics. But VRT is all about working the dorsum of the foot, isn't it?
In a weight-bearing, hand or foot, in a weight-bearing mode, yeah.
How on earth did you come up with that idea? What led to it? Because there's got to be a story behind this one, surely.
Well, there is quite a story.
Good.
Because I'd been qualified about 2 years and began working on individual clients at the St Monica Trust, which is a big 400...
That's down here in Bristol, isn't it?
Yes, it's a 400 person village, really, retirement, long-term care village for 400 older people with chronic pathologies. Some of them are in sheltered housing, others are in 24-hour nursing care, 2 levels of dementia care. And I began working on individuals, but then had a few successes, and very early on, like 28 and 29 years ago, they invited me to actually work for them in an official capacity, referring to the doctors and the nursing staff as a reflexologist.
Right.
So I was able to work with a wide range of older people, but always referring back medically all the time, because they all lived there and they were medically monitored.
Right.
So it gave me a very good platform for my fairly early reflexology career to be working so supported by medics.
But why on the dorsum of the foot?
Because, with many of us know, when we're working on someone who's incapacitated of any age, let alone an older person who may have lymphatic problems in their legs and feet, sometimes I found by the time I'd lifted up a heavy leg, or not always got an elasticated stocking off but removed a sock, or they were uncomfortable, by the time I'd got ready to treat the plantar of their feet, they'd be saying their legs were cramping and could they put their feet down again. So this would sometimes happen, and I'd make the best of a bad job. I felt it was a bad job because I perhaps wasn't helping them as much as I could, because I trained, as we all do, to work the plantar.
Yes. So
I did 2 things. In the very early stages, because I'd learned hand reflexology with Christine Walker, I would leave perhaps the rather inflamed or swollen foot, or and go to the hands.
Right.
And so I'm a great believer in hand reflexology.
Ditto. It's so powerful.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happened was that I would have to put their feet back on the wheelchair platform, or maybe the floor if they were in a chair, and I would work the dorsum, thinking I know I'm working the shoulder or the chest or the knee, but I'm not working all the reflexes we know and love on the palmar or the plantar.
Yes.
But after a few sessions, in cases when I perhaps only worked the dorsum of a person who had the problems that particular week, the next week I came back and one lady said, I don't know what you did last week, but she said after you'd gone, I could lift my arm for the first time higher than I've done in a year.
And for a year?
And it was very moving because it wasn't a big difference, but she could brush the back of her hair again. And it was so empowering. Yeah. It gave her a feeling of being in control, not having to ask, feeling well presented.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, perhaps it's mobility, perhaps I'm just pressing harder. And it happened time and time again, but it wasn't just the limbs or the knees that you could reach dorsally. It might be the bowel, might be even stress-related problems. So what I did, perhaps after a few months, I mapped all the reflexes that we have on I'm using my hands, but have our hands or our feet, mainly the feet at first.
Yeah.
I turned it over and I mapped the whole body on the feet, because we have the 5 zones on the thumb that Ingham taught us.
Yes.
She taught us the whole zone therapy.
Yes.
And the zones mean we're working 3-dimensionally.
Yes.
And as the body is 3-dimensional, our kidneys are actually at the back, nearer the dorsum.
This is very, very true.
That I argued to myself, not to anyone else at that stage, but I thought, why didn't Ingham have the reflexes both sides of the body so we could work the adrenals from either the dorsum or the plantar? It didn't matter which.
That's really interesting though, because I love collecting reflexology foot charts.
Yes.
And you have some of them, Chris Stormer is a particular one, on the plantar aspect, it's got actually a boob drawn on it.
Yes.
And it's a case of thinking, I've never seen it on the plantar aspect. No. Normally you see it on the dorsal aspect. I'm thinking, okay, so she's put it there. But, so you're saying exactly the same thing. Yeah. Why not have on both sides?
Really superimposed approaches to the body in exactly the same way, whether we were using the dorsum or the plantar of the feet.
And of course we are 3-dimensional.
Exactly.
The charts are just 2-dimensional. Exactly. Why can we not work through?
And my findings sort of empirically over that first year were that I was actually getting better results a lot of the time when I was working not too firm, because the feet can be sensitive, but I was getting as good results or even sometimes better. So I'd got my little handwritten charts, hand-drawn charts, and after a year I was never worrying if I could only work the dorsum, only of my older clients at the St Monica Trust, because I knew I could approach the body both ways. But then there was a real watershed moment one day when I met one of the female residents, a lady of 74, and she had chronic osteoporosis and osteoarthritis and angina, so she couldn't have a hip replacement, so she was pretty frail, and she'd been unfortunately hit by another person driving an electric wheelchair.
Gosh!
So she was having a terrible time and telling a great tale of woe as a fellow resident had smashed into her. And she stood forlornly.
I shouldn't be laughing, should I?
Well, she told she dined out on the story once she recovered. But I met her in the corridor of one of the big blocks of this nursing home. You go from garden to garden. They're lovely houses, not really blocks. And she was holding a rollator, told me the sad tale of this accident. And I did probably what any reflexology would have done out of sympathy and empathy. I said, I'm so sorry, I'm just going to my clinic. I can't really stop now. But I knelt down where she was standing, and I worked round the hip, the whole sacrum, lower lumbar area around the heel. I worked up and down the spine. And I had found that round the ankles and the wrists, I seemed to be able to sort of stimulate the zones. I call them zonal triggers, but that was early stuff. But I did that for probably a minute or two. It was that short. And off I went and said I'd visit her another day. And the next morning, I got a call from her saying what one doesn't want to hear. I'm very sorry. Began to apologise, saying I'm so sorry, because she said, after you left me, I got a lot of pain. So I immediately thought, oh gosh, what have I done? And then she said, but within half an hour, my hip went warm, and which is where she'd been the main target of this wheelchair. And she said, I then got a tingling. And she said within 2 hours, I was feeling much better, and most of the pain had gone. And by the next day, she was able to lift her leg higher than before the accident.
Oh!
So it sounded pretty unusual. And I went round to see her. And I often tell groups this, where she was sort of dangerously swinging her leg back and forwards to show her friends on the corridor what she could do. But what was important, and I think that's why I like to share it, the minute I saw a rather large change for the better recovery, I realised it was full weight bearing.
I was going to bring you onto that. You are so good at this. I was going to...
Yeah.
Because the weight bearing is important, isn't it?
And I thought the dorsum... I used to press on the dorsum on wheelchair clients, and I got a feeling that weight bearing was helpful to working the dorsum, but to suddenly lose all the reflexes you've been trained by turning the foot over was very odd, especially for someone who's only been qualified 2 years probably at most.
But interestingly, you were probably that fresh at it, you hadn't become rigid yet, so you were still trying to work out, how can I do this, how can I do that?
Yes.
And you found your way.
Yes, I mean, I was on uncharted waters, but neither was I set in my ways, which is quite good.
Yes.
And you sort of brought out a side I hadn't really thought, but I was completely fresh. I was open to anything on one level. On the other, I was rigidly remembering my International Institute routines.
Must be done this way.
Yes.
And
then once I broke the mould, I was still using all the normal approaches, all the caterpillar walking, and I still do. I mean, and I think the beauty of VRT in many ways is we're not throwing the textbook out, we're just using lateral thinking with all the things we've learned. And you're not using VRT and weight bearing reflexes for more than 5 minutes at most at the beginning or end, sometimes only 2 or 3 times. So it doesn't mean your treatments, whether they're half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, have to extend. You just slightly decrease the amount of time you work with them lying down on the couch. And then when they come, they have the whole body work quickly, a sort of routine of toning up and making the body more responsive. You work the whole body through the dorsum while they stand. They lie down, have their normal session. I've introduced a very deep form of rocking called diaphragm rocking, which helps sleep, and I'd invented that or discovered this special little twisting technique for insomnia before I developed VRT.
Ah.
And so I was using that mainly for jet lag for businessmen in those days who were not interested in therapy at all.
You're going to need to teach me some of that, because I'm terrible when I travel.
Right.
I need to learn that one
then. It is interesting because my husband can be a rather cynical engineer, and he will rock his hand in a certain way, thinking, I know Lynne's clients say it works, but this won't work for me. And he tells the story, and he does this, and then he said the next minute the alarm's ringing.
Oh, brilliant!
So it doesn't work every time, but it works enough. This is nearly 30 years now, and I thought it was only for sleep. I then began to combine it with reflexology, and I think it's something quite special because it seems to pump energy to where the body needs it. So sometimes if someone maybe has a bad shoulder problem, I might rock the feet and they say their neck is tingling.
Is this where you have incorporated movement into VRT?
No,
is that something different?
No, that's an earlier stage. In fact, I was moving that very early on. I did the diaphragm rocking, but the reflexology and movement came a few years later, not many, and I've developed it. I've refined the development now of the reflexology and movement, which is holding reflex points while the body is moved in a certain way. So we can even stand someone or sit someone, hold lower lumbar and hip flexors on both hands, move the body, and then the lower lumbar muscles will just relax.
So you're not actually applying rotation, or you're just literally holding the spot.
You will try rotate. You will apply rotation for a minute.
I'm gonna get a treatment.
Yeah. So you could apply it to find the point and stimulate it, and then you hold it.
And that's good pressure, isn't it?
Yes, it's a firm pressure.
Yep.
And then you would hold the 2 points.
Yes.
Quite precisely.
Yes.
And then if it was a young fit person, they could be standing, and we could get you standing, except we'd lose our heads.
Yes.
But on someone who was older and infirm, you can move them very slightly. So just a tiny bit, but you're actually pressing L4, L5.
Do you know what? That's really interesting, because when you did that, I could feel that in my hip joint. I can actually feel that in my hip joint as you're doing it.
Oh, really?
That is cool.
When I was developing it, could you hear it?
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I was developing it, I thought, well, if I want to help the lower lumbar, great, we'll put it around L4, L5. Yeah. If it's upper thoracic, we'll be up here, T12 here, or the neck right up here. That, and all my unsuspecting friends and family and clients had goes at this. I only ever use the base. It's like now you use the base of the spine, sacrum, coccyx, to adjust the body, and then it allows the body to reverberate right through, and it will target it naturally. So sometimes if someone has a hip issue, or sometimes even if you do that, someone's neck might give a click, or shoulder, as the body does its own adjustment.
Now that I totally understand. There's a wonderful expression that Hannah Marquardt uses: "As above, so below."
Yes, that is a lovely. I haven't heard that.
Oh, haven't you?
No, I think that's a very special one.
And what you're doing is exactly that. You're freeing off the energy below, and then the energy can flow to where it needs above.
Exactly, and the combination of the reflexology and movement is also sort of made even more powerful by, during the standard passive lying down session, by doing the diaphragm rocking, which isn't only for sleep, because it's to give energy to where the body needs it. So I will do the rocking before someone's going to play a tennis match or a football match,
right?
But I will also do it for someone in end of life situations where or teach the carers. The rocking is used in lots and lots of hospices. I've been asked, I don't know how many use it all the time, but I've been asked, and I send a sheet so carers, or I've taught people just to do this rocking, and so people often get calmer, or a relative can do it on the hands or the feet.
Because it sounds a very easy one to be able to teach and for people to learn.
Yes, it's an easy way to help the body heal itself or calm itself at whatever stage of life or energy or health.
Yeah. And with end of life as well, the thing that I hear very often for the carers, they say, thank goodness I can do something now.
I think that's right. And the other thing that I developed, as well as the reflexology and movement, is the nail working on the nail. And so sometimes at end of life situations, which I used with an older friend who was dying, and I've had great feedback from reflexologists and nurses who I've taught the technique to, and I've known it's helped with people who were just unwell in my own situation of helping. But I was with someone during his last hour of life, and it was moving to find he was in so much pain, and yet by rocking the hands in this very distinctive movement just to calm him, and then holding his thumbnails nail on nail, his breathing changed for the better. The pain eased enough, and so his end of life experience was a calm one for him, but a wonderfully helpful one to his wife, because she was feeling powerless at that time when he was in such discomfort. Now, that doesn't always happen. It's not a panacea for everything, but I was privileged enough to experience, although it was my technique, I hadn't experienced it. I'd only heard it from others, but that one time, I mean, I was able to share it. I knew it was calming, but I'd only that once ever been able to use it in a truly end of life.
It's not the sort of thing that an awful lot of us actually have the privilege, if I can say.
It is a privilege
to be with somebody at the end of their life and to help them through in a calm way.
And usually there's a very distraught relative or relatives around, and even if it isn't actually the very end of life, I've been able to show people what to do. And as you said, you can feel powerless.
Yes.
And if you know it's calming, or the breathing will change, or they just feel reassured, it's a two-way thing.
Yeah.
So
I must admit, I taught my mum how to do palliative reflexology.
Oh, did you?
Because my dad had good grief, I can't even remember pancreatic cancer. That was the one. Fancy forgetting the name of that.
Well, yes,
and she said, "Can I learn how to do this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "I'll tell you what, get your iPad," because she's a silver surfer.
Yeah.
I said, "Video what I'm doing," and I took her through it as well.
Yeah.
And she phoned me up while I was still driving home. She says, "I've just done a treatment on your dad." She says, "It's brilliant." She says, and at last she says, "I've got something to do with him," rather than just sit there thinking, "What am I going to say next?"
It's so important, and it's a bond, and it gives very positive memories at the end of life if you can take away that distress.
Yes.
And I think to die being touched or being told you're loved, and have something that is a positive healing act. Because I once spoke to a pathologist, and he said he had never worked on a body, obviously now dead, but that didn't show signs of healing right up to the last minute. If there is a wound and someone's bleeding to death, the blood is coagulating up till the last minute. The heart is trying to pump.
So it's still trying to live.
So that wonderful life force is there. And I think we as reflexologists, if we can tap into that bodily intelligence and just give tiny little reflexology treatments or skills just to calm the body, it's a gift.
Yes.
It's a gift of life till the end of life.
I've never heard it said that way. Oh, that's beautiful.
I've never said that before. It only just came to me.
Oh. Do you know, I've got no idea where we are on this now. Let's have a look, shall we? Oh, yes, now then. So, 2 years ago, you were given an award by the Association of Reflexologists, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And it says here, for excellence in Reflexology Innovation Award. Now, tell me about this, please. Is this, again, VRT? Or
Yes, I think it was, definitely.
You think it was?
No, it was from VRT, because to be honest, I haven't really done anything other than VRT that might... I mean, I'm a reflexologist. I'm very passionate about it. But my whole work, where I've written books and done DVDs and teach, everything is geared towards that. And I think the AOR was acknowledging that, and someone submitted my name. And what I was very touched about, as everyone is who wins these awards, is that they're peer voted. So you have your peers vote. And I think I did get emails and things from people from years ago whom I taught saying, "Oh, I'm so pleased you've come up with this award.
Lovely.
I'm using your technique." So that made it special. I think within the AOR, and when I speak at conferences and things, I think people are they're probably interested in the weight bearing side because it is quite unusual and different. They're also relieved they don't have to kneel for long or stand for long, or you can work on someone lying down in a bed and just put their hand slightly weight bearing on a book beside them, or they could be sitting down as you are and you could kneel on the floor. People don't have to stand, so it's very versatile. But I think one of the innovations that has been of interest to people is that I discovered these techniques on chronically sick older people with multiple pathologies and got good results. And I did an observational study in 1997 on just pain and mobility with the doctors involved at the trust and the nursing staff, and a very small number, just 8 people. But after 6 treatments of only 15-20 minutes each, little bit of VRT, some classical reflexology, there was a 60% plus improvement, more measurable.
60%?
Yes. And
now, that's not just a little bit, that's phenomenal.
No, it was. And the fact that it was monitored by the 2 GPs, the nursing staff had to vet what was written down, see if someone could move better or not. So that was a rather lovely start.
This sounds as if this almost has the beginnings of a piece of research. Have you done research, or is there research being done with what you're...
Well, I haven't done any research other than something I'll mention about working with London University. I've done observational studies, and other reflexologists have on pain or anxiety and things using VRT.
Right.
The actual research where you would call it a trial with double blind has not been done, and it is very difficult to set up. Not impossible, because colleagues like Carol Samuel, Sally Kay, various people have done it. What has been rather interesting for me, if I just give a little bit of background, although my work is with all my clients of all ages, from tiny babies, youngest 2 days, oldest person 101. So I love the span.
That is a spectrum. It really is.
It's a real spectrum. But the techniques and treatments I offer, which started developing VRT on the older people 15 years ago, I began using those when I worked with, and still do, work with a professional championship football team. So I've, for the last 15 years, been part of the medical team of a football club, obviously working with elite athletes. And what I rather like doing when I speak at a conference on sports injury or maintenance or whatever I'm talking about, people think because I work with elite footballers, I must have developed everything on them. But I say no, I developed it on older people,
right,
and then transferred those skills to working on super fit young men, and
you
got the
lucky
same.
thing, you.
I know. I love my footballing life, but I also love my life with my wonderful older people.
Oh.
So I think I'm very privileged. And what can be interesting is older lady may fall and hit her shoulder, and we do some reflexology and movement to free it up. I might do that on a Tuesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, a young player is age 21, he's fallen and hit his shoulder. We do exactly the same.
It's the same healing mechanisms.
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
And the fact that I thought that if I can get chronically sick older people responding to what I'm doing, then it can obviously help anyone. And I think the fact that I've been part of a football club for so long shows, because football can be a very competitive world, of course. They only want to ever use helpful, non-invasive techniques, whether it's yoga, physio, whatever, if it's going to help them. And the fact that reflexology, I'm there before the games, warming the players up, and then after training in the week I go in. And it was within my work with the football club that the club doctor is also a lecturer at London University in the medical department at Queen Mary Hospital, Queen Mary University, and he is very supportive of the work. He's very open. He's a pure medic of a very high level, but he's open to looking at different ways of helping the body. So he arranged to put forward a proposition for a year 4 medic who's doing a BSc, an extra year in sports science, and one of the subjects was reflexology in football, and that dissertation subject was passed by the London University Ethics Board as viable for a dissertation as part of a medical doctor's training. And for reflexology, I think that is a great landmark
very much
in some ways.
Yes.
And so we worked with a group of players. We got a sort of an operation of how do we do this, what techniques do we use. So we looked at hamstrings, helping the psoas muscle, because I've done the Nico Pauly nerve reflexology. So we were able to use reflexes that lots of people know now, of course, because they've done the nerve reflexology with him or Carol Samuel, but they weren't standard diploma.
No, I was never taught it.
No, I wasn't. So I've been able to work on our good old favourite reflexes: spine, groin, shoulder, neck. But then we can do the psoas, the piriformis, and we set up a protocol of about 8 or 9 moves and use my reflexology and movement techniques. And we measured before and after, and we measured with no reflexology how far they could go. With classical, could they go a bit further? We had to build in that they were stretching, so they might have gone further the second time anyway.
True.
And then we did the VRT, reflexology and movement, where we were getting in some cases, quite measurable improvements within a minute. Or, we're talking about one short session.
That quickly?
It happens if it works. I mean, it happens on classes. If it happens that it just frees up the muscles will just glide or free up.
Amazing. That's brilliant.
So it's sort of, and it might be worth mentioning because I found weight-bearing reflexology by chance as a response to how do I treat someone, how can I do a good job as a reflexologist. And so I knew weight bearing was the key to helping the body. I never say reflexology is better. It's a good adjunct, and I'm proud of it. But I never want to make it out to be better than anything else. But it's helpful.
Oh, yes.
And if it works for someone, give it a go.
But that's why we're a complementary therapy.
Exactly.
Rather than alternative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And within the reflexology framework, it can VRT can complement. I've taught a group of chiropractors at a clinic. I went in for a session just to teach them the moves I've discussed from the study we did with London University, just to show them how they can free a psoas muscle quicker or release the groin. Then they can do their own work.
Yep.
So it's never saying either or. It's just saying how can I help someone more by working like that.
Now, you've taught your VRT quite a while now.
Yeah.
Is there any memorable occasions that would sort of like a good story?
Well, I can think of one or two rather lovely events, and I can also think of a funny story that I might just tell.
Go on then.
I trained with Tony Porter, as I mentioned.
Yes.
Dwight Byers, of course, is Ingham's nephew and a great pioneering man for reflexology. And I met him obviously just as a student, and I went and taught in about 2002, I think, in Florida. Not where he taught, for other people. I was just teaching VRT in a class, and he knew a couple of people who were attending the class and were part of the organisation. So he came across because he was curious, wanted to meet me. But when I arrived, I was told he had enrolled on my class.
You taught?
Yes.
Good.
So
oh, wow.
I and the other members were members of the group who'd come, the other reflexologists, thought perhaps he was going to do part of the session. They couldn't quite work out, but they'd come for VRT.
One could well understand why.
But Dwight, he was great because he joined in, very helpful, very respectful. He sat in the row of desks with everyone else. I teased him and said, "That's very good, Dwight," because he put his hand up when he wanted to ask a question. And I got a wonderful photo of him kneeling down, working on someone's foot, with me pointing and saying, "That's not quite right."
Oh!
And then I got another photo of me giving him his VRT certificate.
Oh, how fabulous.
And he was a good sport. And I go on classes. I try and study different things every year because we've always got things to learn. I've got a lot to learn about my own route with VRT, masses to learn from other people. So that was nice. And other memorable stories are probably not to say any one more, but I've worked with a few children who, if they respond, they often respond wonderfully well. Little girl who was having a very complicated form, they thought epilepsy, fits like 12 or 20 a day. And I just tried a bit of reflexology and movement, some nail working. I don't know quite what I did for her, and often we get results and we don't quite know. We just give of our best. And she stopped having those fits. And she had to have medication, and her life was not easy. But it was a change, and her grandmother wrote a very moving article about it for my newsletter. And there are several children who have been very much helped by reflexology, and it's always lovely to give a little person perhaps a little bit of a uplift in life when life seems very bleak when they're young, and for the parents. So
that's fabulous. Now, if this has whetted anybody's appetite and they're thinking, wow, I want to learn VRT, what have you got coming up?
I've got 2 days. Well, I've got various things coming up in all sorts of ways.
Okay.
I'm teaching in Bristol. In fact, I'm teaching in Bristol this month and in May. In April, I'm in Spain for a whole week teaching it.
Oh, that's just going to be awful for you, isn't it?
People will be so sorry. I'm teaching in a lovely retreat for Equilibrio in the Spanish mountains where they can do yoga.
You're not selling it to me at all. No.
Actually, it's all full up. But otherwise, perhaps you could come in my suitcase. That would be nice. At the end, and then I've got London courses and other things, and I do small master classes as well as bigger groups.
Lovely.
And
is there a web address that people can find your courses on?
www.boothvrt.com.
Lovely. We'll put a link of that at the bottom of the YouTube page as well, so that you can click on that and get straight to Lynne's page then. Yeah,
yes,
lovely.
That's fine. And really, I mean, at the end of the year, I'm in Australia. I'm speaking at a conference.
Oh, you have a terrible job of it, don't you?
I don't do so much travelling as I used to, and I'm trying to finish a little self-help book on the reflexology and movement. And I'd written a bigger book, which is more or less finished, but I've actually now pruning it down because I've written 2 textbooks, which are still selling and they're around. They sell to the public, but they're really textbooks as well.
Yes.
But I want to have a real little handbook where people can sit on a plane and think, how can I help my ears pop? Or how can I, with a tight groin or cramp, can I just move my leg while I hold the groin point? So a lot of the stuff I use on my footballers and a lot of the self-help stuff I give to my clients, I'm putting in very simple form now into a book, so anyone can pick up and just do that. And then if they're more interested in reflexology, by me kick-starting them with that, there's all the lovely classical books. There's so many books they can find to help them, or they can look at VRT more if they want.
Brilliant.
That's what's in the pipeline. The cover and a lot of the chapters
are done. It
never
stops, does it? It's all.
I think most reflexologists, if you love what you do, there's always an impetus for that little bit more. Yeah. Or we all get ideas, and you just have to follow your heart and experiment.
Brilliant.
So,
Lynne, it has been a delight chatting with you and learning about VRT and what you're doing and what you've got coming up.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
You invited me. I'm at your place.
I know, but you wanted to speak to me, and I'm thrilled to be asked.
If you've enjoyed this chat that we've done, we've got loads more coming up with other reflexologists and contributors to our therapy. Do click on the subscribe button so that you can be notified by YouTube of what's happening. Please also do click on the like button if you've enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you at our next little film that we put together. So thank you very much.